So Cam Newton came out recently on First Take and responded to a question that was asked by Stephen A. Whether or not he would be willing to give up his MVP for a Super Bowl. And, at one point I didn't know if I was really going to cover this or not. But then I thought about it. I was like, you know what? As a fan, I really believe that I should cover this for a number of reasons, but none more important than the fact that there has to be a line between what I believe as a fan and how he feels as a player. And I think there can be a meeting in the middle, but I also have seen like multiple different conversations about this specific topic. Some people really on the side of Cam Newton, some people completely diametrically opposed to Cam Newton. And I'm going to give what I believe and where I fall in this situation. So let's listen to them. I want to hear what he has to say.
And Cam, I ask you, Cam, if you could give back that league MVP for a Super Bowl championship, would you do it?
Nope.
Oh.
Really?
Really?
Why?
I think part of the reason why the few people that I have seen that have been like, even in our space, right, that have been completely opposed to this take is because of just how matter of fact and how quick that answer was given, right? There was not a lot of thought about it, which means that this is something that clearly, obviously when you're in production meetings and stuff like that inside of a show, these are, you're going to ask certain questions and stuff like that, but sometimes it can just fly off the hip. And I feel like in this situation, this was one of those ones where it was like, you know what? Stephen A. just letting it fly. Hey, man, I'm going to answer it straightforward. No, wouldn't give it back. And I understand, but I'm going to go a little bit further because I don't want to get too far ahead because I want to listen to what Cam has to say and then, respond from a fan perspective accordingly.
Because you have to ask it through this lens. That was a very journalistic viewpoint or vantage point or response, Stephen A. I'll ask you this question, and, just to pose this thought. What's more important, impact or championships? You look at a guy like Allen Iverson, or you stood up on the table and blah, 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 blah. Everybody's not going to be Michael Jordan. Everybody's not going to be Patrick Mahomes. Everybody's not going to be these individuals who have the luxury of saying, hey, I not only dominated this sport, but I also have championships to back it.
All right. I do understand the Iverson point because on some level, I think that Iverson and Cam have some things in common. What do I mean? Iverson was on a team. His only finals appearance was against the first year emerging Kobe and Shaq Lakers, right? Who end up going on to win 3 titles straight, going to 4 straight NBA finals. So you just ran into the guys at the wrong time. Plus, what were did he really have the most loaded roster? No. Eric Snow, Dikembe, himself. I don't know the whole roster right off the top of my head. But it wasn't one of those. It was very much 2007 LeBron going to the finals against the Spurs kind of roster. It wasn't, he didn't have the kind of guys that he needed. It wasn't later in his career when he played with Melo in Denver, and even then it was, he was kind of in the twilight years of his career, far from the peak, if you will. So similarly, Cam Newton in 15 loses Steve Smith. You know what I'm saying? The offensive weapons aren't like, amazing. You got Greg Olsen, who was amazing, obviously. Jonathan Stewart, who was amazing. Ryan Khalil, some guys on the offensive line, Michael Orr, right? But as far as like your perimeter weapons, Philly Brown, Ted Ginn, Brenton Burson here and there, it wasn't a lot to be desired. I'll say that. So I can understand and level with him from that perspective, right? Of like, I might not have had the best overall like cast around me to be able to do the things that I felt like was the most effective. But at the same time, it's like, I'm guarantee you, if you really ask Iverson in his heart of hearts, and maybe he's answered this before and I just missed it, I'm wrong. I'm sure that Iverson would love to have that hardware because it's the one thing, in my opinion, that validates you in your career, right? Lamar Jackson has two MVPs and could win a third one this year. But you saw the press conference. I saw the press conference. And that's going to lead me to another point that I'm going to get to in just a moment.
Like, let me remind you, Brad Johnson won a Super Bowl. Trent Dilfer won a Super Bowl. Respectfully, Nick Foles won a Super Bowl. So, yes, when you look at those guys and you say, okay, what's more important? Would you have preferred to win a Super Bowl? I think that's the humble approach. But if we're being honest,
I'm sorry. I don't like that. I don't. I don't like that. I'm having a hard time saying why I don't like it because I don't really have the words to kind of formulate the reason why I don't like it. But it just sounds borderline elitist, I guess. I'm sure if Jake wins that Super Bowl for us in 2003, like the mere fact that he got there, like think about, we talk about Jake often, Smitty, Moose. There were so many other people that you would get to before you got to Jake, even though Jake played out of his mind that game and really through the playoffs. So I understand, like, individualistically, yes, it's going to look more, you're going to have more long-term, I guess, sustainability from a brand perspective because you won an MVP, right? I hate to, shots at Brad Johnson and Trent. I mean, gosh, that's just, I don't know. I don't know if I like that. I don't. Anyway.
Impact of you holding yourself accountable to say everybody has a responsibility to do. And you can say as an MVP award winner or an All-American, you've held yourself or you've held your end of the bargain down.
And that I agree with 100%. You have worked your tail off to do exactly everything that you needed to do. But here's where I disagree. You did what you needed to do for the larger goal to be met. And the thing that I don't like about this the most is that the people, the detractors, people that you and I, right, as fans, some fans, obviously, you're going to have those Cam should have jumped on that football kind of fans, right? This kind of take, if this would have been, obviously it's many years later, right? 10 years to be exact. But this kind of take is, to me, what devalues those conversations and those, like, me really, if you're a real fan of this team and you're a real fan of Cam Newton as I am, these are the kind of conversations that kind of put you in a perspective of like, man, it kind of validates some of the stuff that you were hearing, right? It kind of validates some of the things that people might think about him, right? Where it's more, me-centric. Because yes, you held up your end of the bargain. But the ultimate bargain, I just personally, maybe they think this and you don't hear it out loud. And I think that might be my biggest issue with this whole thing. It's like, as a fan, and look, I understand this is our GOAT, right? So I know that some of y'all might not like where I'm going, where I've already been with this and this take. But he's not necessarily wrong in terms of like his individual success and what he had to do to achieve it. And these guys put themselves through, from the training to the, nutrition, everything that they have to do to be great. Far be it from me, some YouTuber, to come around telling you how to feel about your individual success. But as a fan, I'm okay with saying that I would have definitely wanted to have the Super Bowl over your MVP, respectfully. And I respect the heck out of your MVP because that season was magical, because it wasn't like any other MVP that we've ever seen. It was a magical season. But it wasn't sustainable. Now, you could argue the reason it wasn't sustainable is because the organization didn't try to sustain it. When you look at, and I do think that part of this, some of this has to be Cam looking at someone like Jalen Hurts, for example, because he goes on to talk about, game managers versus, game changers, and we'll listen to that in a second. But I think that part of this is him looking at this and like, man, look at what Kansas City's doing for Pat, man. Xavier Worthy, they go out and get Juju Smith-Schuster. They already got Travis Kelce. They draft Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Think about that. You got a team that just came off of a Super Bowl appearance, or I think they might have won the Super Bowl, right? Maybe it was the year before when they played Tampa and they came off an appearance. But either way, they were drafting way down in the draft, and they drafted Clyde Edwards-Helaire, right? The year after our Super Bowl, not only did we not replace what we tried to with, and salute to Benet and Wickery, but like we didn't necessarily like try to replace with the same caliber type of player that Josh Norman had become. Or we didn't come in and say, you know what, we recognize there's a deficiency with perimeter weapons and things like that. Like, look, yeah, we can go draft a Kelvin Benjamin, you know what I'm saying, at some point, and this was before that, obviously. But like he got hurt, so it's like, why not go out and try to, re-up on that again, right? Why not go out and target a big name wide receiver in free agency? And it's possible that maybe they did, but I don't think so, right? So I think that, when you look at Jalen Hurts having A.J. Brown, them drafting a Heisman-winning receiver in Devontae Smith and, going out and getting Saquon Barkley, Cam's probably looking at this like, man, about the only thing I have to hold on to is the fact that I won MVP because I'm doing my best not to, crap on the organization that I got it with because they didn't do the same things for me that these guys are having done for them. Or at least it didn't seem like there was a concerted effort to try that. Now, eventually, I feel like they did, drafting Christian McCaffrey, drafting DJ Moore, trying to do it organically. And then, of course, Cam ends up getting hurt, right? But it makes you wonder, because here's the thing that I wonder. One of the things I wonder is, like, I look at the situation that's going on between A.J. Brown and Jalen, right? There's like a Cold War, if you will. They're friendly to each other based on the work relationship, but it's like, I'm reading the book on the sideline. That there was interactions with them earlier in the season. The whole comment in the press conference, or not press conference, but they called him at the locker and they asked him what the problem was. And he said, offense or passing or whatever. And it's like, you can tell there's a bit of a Cold War going on there, but they deal with it. He works through it. It's a diva, right? You got to have a certain type of personality to be able to deal with that. Like, I think one of the biggest nods to what Bryce can do moving forward is the fact that you had to deal with the Deontay situation this year, right? So now you're equipped if they bring in a T. Higgins or they draft, whomever they draft, right? That if that person starts to get ahead of himself and become that kind of diva because they're not being involved, right? He better equipped to handle it. My question is, okay, and I'm not saying that Smitty was any of that. I'm not saying that Cam. I do wonder this, though. I wonder, like, could that situation have been mended more to the point where he sticks around because you recognize, like, hey, if he's here, that only increases our chances for success. He doesn't necessarily have to go, right? But if the goal in letting him go was to develop this guy, then you wonder, and we're not there to know these conversations, so I can't say this definitively. But one of the sides of this conversation that I have had internally in my brain for the longest time is, well, what could have happened if they would have been able to work through any differences, or, were there any differences? Did they have any kind of beef with each other, or did they feel like, Cam's got to develop and this has to become his team? And it's just like, well, I mean, does it? I've often argued that I don't know that 2015 happens if Smitty is on the roster because he is someone that has to have volume, and rightfully so. He's a Triple Crown winner, right? You want to get him the ball. But I think Cam needed to have the autonomy to move the ball around how he, saw fit in order for the offense to run effectively, right? But it also makes you wonder, like, could they have gotten to some kind of common ground where Smitty understands, like, hey, look, you might not have a 1,000-yard season, but, boy, we might be super successful, and you will be a huge portion of that. Could that have been something that have, been placed on the table and then been able to be, have a common ground on that? Who knows? Who knows? Let's keep listening.
And that's what it really comes down to for me. I know that's not a popular pick. I'm trying to be popularized. But my take is I'm taking individual success because I did my job. Football is not about one guy trying to do 11 jobs. It's 11 guys doing one job.
I respect everything that you're saying.
I would have liked to have heard the further point of that conversation, because that does sound like a sort of a talking out of both sides of your neck kind of thing. It's about an individual doing their job, yes, but it is about a team goal, right? And the team goal ultimately is winning, And again, I know this is a struggle for me because Cam's not necessarily wrong. It's just that As a fan, I ain't trying to hear that, man. Like, especially not when we've been starving the way we've been starving, especially not how we saw it end for you. You know what I'm saying? Like, to me, I just feel like hearing this stuff out loud furthers certain narratives about him that people like us have been fighting off for years, and you just don't want to hear this out loud. And I get it, it's content. Like, you got your prerogative to say whatever you want to say. But as a fan, I got the prerogative to feel how I want to feel. And I'm like, yo, I don't want to hear that. I don't know. Y'all might kill me in the chat on this one, and that's okay. I'm open to dialogue.
Sounds like what you're saying is you think that it would be more impressive the MVP. I think it would be impressive if the MVP is Lamar because we've only had a handful that have won 3, and I don't think any of them have won 3 by the time they were 27 years old. Wildly impressive. But ultimately, you guys, Jalen Hurts has now had 2 Super Bowl appearances before age 27 years old. There's only a handful of quarterbacks that have ever done that. In fact, the other ones that have done that before were either Hall of Famers or future Hall of Famers. That is wildly impressive to me, especially when you consider that this guy, how many times have we said with the success of quarterbacks that it is contingent on consistency at the coordinator position?
I agree. I want to chime in on this too as well. I really don't get this Jalen Hurts stuff. I don't. I've argued this for the Bryce Young take, right? Like, Bryce Young didn't have a ton of yards in the Atlanta game, but he put up 5 touchdowns, and we won that game. Defensively, if you get more stops, right, we blow them out. Defensively, if you get more stops, maybe the Philly game doesn't have to come down to a last, minute Xavier Legette throw or drop or whatever, right? What exactly do you need your quarterback to be? Like, I think sometimes we would much rather see the, Peyton Manning 50-plus touchdown season, and then they get smoked by Seattle because a great defense shows up and Russell Wilson wins his first Super Bowl, right? Than to see, hey, man, I might only throw for 195. Saquon might rush for 150, but we in the bowl again. You know what I'm saying? Now, Saquon wasn't here the first time, but I'm saying we in the bowl again. I might only throw 8 passes in a game, Jimmy Garoppolo, and we rush for over 200 yards in that game collectively with a, group of backs. But, man, we in the Super Bowl. And then we got back there again with a similar formula. What do you really need from your quarterback other than for him to be a manager of the game? I hate that term. I really do. Because if I'm managing the game, I'm managing the net positives and trying to mitigate the losses, right? So if that's what we have in 9 on our side here, I can already tell that there would be people that would probably be like, yo, I'm not with that. I am. I would much rather, like I said, I've argued this point. You got 2 quarterbacks in a similar situation. Ben Roethlisberger, Eli Manning. Ben has much better stats. Ben played on, you could argue, much better teams. I wouldn't even argue that. I just think that's a fact. Both have 2 Lombardis. One went to 3, 1, 2. One went to 2, won both of them, right? Whose career would you rather have? I'd say both. Either or. Because at the end of the day, what was hoisted? The Lombardis. Why do we think that Eli Manning is in contention for Hall of Fame honors? Because of those 2 Lombardis and because of who he beat to do it, right? So to me, if Eli won an MVP and went to 2 Super Bowls, yeah, he'd probably have more of a stronger case for MVP, but for Hall of Fame because of the MVP honor and going to 2 Super Bowls. But I can guarantee you without fail, because it's also who you beat. Man, you can't tell me that in the back of Cam's mind, he wouldn't be thinking to himself, not only am I facing the sheriff and have the chance to beat him, but I'm also going to beat somebody who was in my draft class as well, and I see him doing what he's doing in Von Miller. I get to do it to both of y'all. Pause.
We talked about that with RG3 and why he never ended up living up to that potential, right? We've talked about that time and time again. People seem to forget that Jalen Hurts has had a cycle of coordinators as well, right? This is a guy who we have tried to minimize his contributions as much as possible. I give you that. I still don't necessarily have him in my top 5 just in terms of arm talent, but what he does incredibly well. But ultimately, when we talk about these guys, he's trying to join the Lamar Jacksons, the Josh Allens. What does he have over them? He has 2 Super Bowl appearances in the last 3 years alone.
2 Super Bowl appearances in the last couple of years alone. That's a fact. I don't care if I'm not those guys. I could care less. Because the only other person that's doing this than me is the guy that I'm getting ready to face wearing 15. The only one. That means something.
To me, that is more impressive, whether he wins or not, than winning another MVP, simply because you put your team in a position and did what you had to do to get him there to compete for the ultimate prize. The ultimate prize to you may have been the MVP. I think typically the ultimate prize would be winning a championship.
And I think the ultimate prize is definitely winning a championship. But to Cam's point, you control what you can control. And
Agreed. 100% agree. You only control what you can control. I see arguments for both sides. But again, primarily, I'm speaking from the perspective as a Carolina Panthers fan. And I'm sure as a Carolina Panthers fan, most of y'all out there would probably agree with me. Look, your MVP was amazing. Man, did the MVP come with a parade? No. We got an amazing moment in an NFC Championship game. That was our Super Bowl. That and Jericho Cotchery called it.
sometimes you're on a team where it's out of your control of getting that championship, but any and everything you could have possibly done, you've accomplished that and then some. When we look at Jalen Hurts, part of the thing where I think you're looking at him in that caliber, because he did have an MVP caliber season in 2022 when they went to the Super Bowl, didn't win it because Mahomes was that much better, but he was right there on par with him. Cam, you mentioned some of the names that have won Super Bowls. Hell, you can put my name on the list. I won a Super Bowl. I'm sitting here across from an MVP player in Cam Newton. If you have to pick one of our careers, yes, I won a Super Bowl. Hell, I'm taking Cam's 10 times out of 10. I'm raising a little.
Man, stop it. That's because you're a corner. I get it from your perspective. But you were on one of the greatest dynasties in the history of this league. The second part of that dynasty, I should say, with the Pats. Nah, man. Bro, think about what you're saying. Yes, as an MVP, you get the opportunity of a lifetime, right? To be the best of the best players in the National Football League. But your hardware that you won afforded you, your brother, Teddy Bruschi, Edelman, and many other Pats to be a part of now TV because y'all are interesting based on what you did universally successful with your team hoisting Lombardi trophies. With the greatest quarterback up to this point, I should say, to ever play. And yes, the same thing happened with us. Greg's on TV, Steve's on TV, TD's on TV. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of guys doing media. Cam is on TV. But did that come off of just Cam's MVP season, or was it because of the greatness of that team as a whole? I would say the team. And I'm sure if you ask each one of those guys if they would rather have that Lombardi or celebrate the fact that Cam won an MVP, that we had statistically the best defense, or whatever else that looked like, I guarantee you those guys are going to say they would much rather have that Super Bowl.
Little boy, if he can have that level of a career and win an MVP and be one of the best players in the NFL in a given season, that is something extraordinary that not everybody can accomplish. There are going to be 53 guys on an active roster when you win a Super Bowl that are going to be out there in the confetti, putting the T-shirt and the hat on, family going crazy, wife and girlfriend on the field somehow on opposite ends, and we having a blast. There's only going to be one person in a given season that's going to be able to say, I was the MVP. I was the best player in the NFL for that season, the most valuable one on an NFL roster. To me, that supersedes a Super Bowl appearance.
And I understand that. McCourty's not wrong. You are not wrong at all. Cam's not wrong. The only thing as a fan, and this is where I'm going to land this plane, the only thing I will say as a fan of Cam Newton, as a fan of the Panthers, that does bother me in a way, is that I would think that that same energy that existed when you were upset hearing the people celebrate right behind you in the press conference that you got killed for the next 6 months and up until the season started again would still burn on you on the inside now of not closing the deal, right? And not getting back there. Seeing Lamar Jackson, who is on pace to potentially win 3 MVPs, seeing the look on his face after not getting it done again, knowing the narratives that will exist as a result of that, you can tell it's eating him alive. Now, they go on to say, like, hey, you've already been there before. You know what I'm saying? Like, Lamar has won 1 MVP, all that kind of stuff. I think this is so multi-layered. I think there's so many different things that might be going on in Cam's mind when he's talking about this, seeing that he was kind of birthed the generation of a lot of these guys that we're seeing right now, right? Now, I'm not saying that they were, first. Clearly, Cam Newton was not the first dual threat quarterback, right? But the way he played the game definitely opened the doors for how you see things going on right now. RPO offenses, spread option offense in the NFL, lockout season, Rob Chudzinski's playbook ends up in Carolina. The rest is history, right? So it's a copycat league. So obviously, that started to happen with RG3 and then it happened with Russ and then so on and so forth, right? But as a fan, again, and I'm being careful because I don't want to make it sound like I'm just completely like missing Cam's, point and how he feels on a personal level. I'm just saying as a fan, man, I'd have much rather seen that Lombardi. Much rather seen that Lombardi, right? And I'm sure that if you tell the truth, you would have too. You would have much rather seen it. But I don't know. This has been it's been different. I want to know what y'all think about this, right? And feel free. If you disagree with me, totally disagree, and that's fine. If you agree with me, cool. I'm not in it. This conversation is not necessarily for us to agree or disagree. It's more like just have an open conversation about a topic that honestly was polarizing in a time where there's really not a lot of Panther polarizing topics to talk about outside of what we're going to do moving forward for this, 2025 season. But this one caught my eye and I'm like, yo, I've got to respond to this. But either way, let me know what you think below. Make sure to comment, like, and subscribe. This is another edition of the One Carolina Show with John Farmer. I appreciate y'all, man. Keep pounding.